The Last Mistake. Chapter 1. The beginning of the end. In a small, sleepy town nestled between rolling hills and ancient forests, lived a man named Ethan Holt. He was a quiet, reserved man in his late 30s with a past shrouded in secrecy. His dark eyes often held a faraway look, as if he was constantly haunted by something. He lived alone in a house that had been passed down through generations of Holt's, a place where time seemed to stand still. Ethan had always been meticulous about his life. Everything had its place, every plan its execution. However, there was one thing he had never been able to control: the overwhelming guilt that had plagued him for years. No one in the town knew what that guilt stemmed from. Only Ethan understood the weight it carried, and he had long learned to live with it, or so he thought. It was on a rainy evening, when the town was engulfed in mist, that Ethan received an unexpected letter. The envelope was yellowed with age, its edges frayed as though it had traveled a long distance to reach him. There was no return address, just his name written in a shaky, unfamiliar hand. He carefully opened the envelope, unfolding the letter inside. Ethan, it began. The past is never truly gone. You cannot run from it. Meet me at the old oak tree at midnight. I have something to show you. You will understand soon enough. Sincerely, someone who knows your secret. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The oak tree. He hadn't thought about that tree in years. Not since the incident that had irrevocably changed his life. The letter seemed to taunt him, a cruel reminder of a time he had tried to bury. But there was no escaping it now. Chapter 2. The Oak Tree. The old oak tree stood at the edge of the forest, its twisted branches reaching into the sky like gnarled fingers. It was a place Ethan had once known well, a place where decisions were made that could never be undone. As the clock struck midnight, he found himself standing beneath its towering presence once again, the weight of years pressing down on his chest. The rain had stopped, but the air was thick with the scent of damp earth and moss. Ethan's breath came in shallow gasps as he scanned the area, expecting anyone to appear. But the night was silent. There was no one there. Minutes passed, then hours, and just as he was about to give up, he heard a rustling in the shadows. A figure emerged from the mist, a woman cloaked in a long, dark coat. She was tall, her features obscured by the darkness, but Ethan could feel her eyes on him, piercing through the night. You came, the woman said, her voice low and steady. Ethan didn't respond immediately. His heart pounded in his chest as memories from the Past began to flood his mind. Who is she? He wondered. What does she want? The woman stepped closer, her face now illuminated by the dim moonlight. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as recognition washed over him. Claire, he whispered, his voice barely audible. She smiled, but it was a cold, empty smile, one that held no warmth. It's been a long time, Ethan. A very long time. Chapter 3, The Secret. Claire's appearance brought with it a rush of memories of a summer long ago when Ethan and Claire had been inseparable. They had been young and carefree, two souls intertwined by a bond so strong it seemed unbreakable. But then, everything changed in an instant. One decision, one mistake, had torn them apart forever. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to piece together the past. He had thought Claire was gone, that she had vanished from his life for good. But here she was, standing in front of him, her presence a chilling reminder of what he had done. I didn't think you'd ever come back, Ethan said, his voice trembling. I never wanted to come back, Claire replied sharply. But you left me no choice. The time has come for you to face what you've done. Ethan swallowed hard. He had hoped that the guilt, the shame, would eventually fade with time, but it hadn't. It had only grown stronger, festering inside him like an open wound. And now, Claire was here, forcing him to confront it all. You don't understand, he began, his voice cracking. I didn't mean for it to happen. I thought you could escape it, Claire interrupted, her eyes flashing with anger. But you can't. It's time for the truth to come out. Ethan's knees went weak, and he collapsed to the ground in a heap, his head in his hands. The weight of his past was too much to bear. He had made a terrible mistake, one that had cost Claire everything. And now, the consequences of that mistake were catching up with him. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice breaking. I never wanted to hurt you. Claire stood there, silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small, worn photograph. She handed it to Ethan, and he took it, his hands shaking. It was a picture of the two of them, taken years ago, when they had been happy. But there was something else in the photograph, a shadow lurking in the background, barely visible but undeniable. A presence that had been there all along. Watching them, you see, Claire asked quietly. You weren't the only one who made a mistake that night. But you were the one who paid for it. Ethan looked at the photograph, his mind reeling. He had never seen that shadow before, but now it was clear it was the mistake that had ruined everything. Chapter 4, The Revelation. The photograph shook in Ethan's hands as Claire's words sank in. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. What is this? Who is that? What happened that night? Claire's expression softened for a moment, a fleeting glimpse of the woman he once knew. You don't remember, do you? She said gently. You never wanted to remember, but now you have no choice. Ethan's heart began to race. He was on the verge of discovering something that had been buried deep within his mind. Something he had been running from for years. It was an accident, Claire continued. But an accident with terrible consequences. You didn't know what you were doing when you made that choice, Ethan. But you can't pretend it didn't happen. Ethan closed his eyes, trying to block out the growing realization. The accident he remembered now. He had been at the edge of the forest, with Claire by his side, and in that moment, something had gone horribly wrong. He had made a choice. He had made the last mistake